The Celestial Empire, or Points and Pickings of Information about China and the Chinese, by George Mogridge. Chapter 6. Continuation of the Chinese dynasties. The rulers of China have been, for the most part, degraded, effeminate, selfish, and cruel, though some have sustained a different character. Qing Tang founded the Shang dynasty and ruled with moderation and prudence, laying up grain for times of scarcity and demeaning himself with seeming humility. 27 princes followed him. After Puan Kang died, the Shang dynasty declined. Kang Su, Kia Su, Lin Xin, Kang Ting, and Wu Yi were sad oppressors of the people, some of whom ran away to the neighboring islands, and it is thought that Japan was thus supplied with Chinese colonists. Chao Xin, who was, I think, the last of the Shang dynasty, being a cruel tyrant, was about to be deprived of his throne when, rather than submit, he dressed himself up in his royal robes and, setting fire to the palace, perished in the flames. Had Chao Xin lived a better life, he might, perhaps, have died a more peaceable death. Bad conduct ever leads to ill. It always did, and always will. Next came the Chao, the Xin, the Han, and the Xin dynasties. Two of these are alike in name, but the Chinese use a different character to describe them. During the reign of Jiang Wang, coins were first issued in China. It was in the Chu dynasty that the famous philosopher Confucius flourished. This was about 500 years before the birth of our Savior. Confucius and his disciples wrote many books, so that from his time the Chinese records are more to be relied on than those which relate to earlier times. In the Xin dynasty, there was grievous oppression. In that of Han, the incursions of the Tatars occasioned great confusion, and the daughters of the emperors were given them in marriage, but they were no more contented than they were before. Wu Te, Xuan Te, and Ge Te were among the early Tatar princes, but they could no more live forever than their neighbors. If kings the shroud of death must wear, can we do better than prepare? I will tell you how it was that Buddhism was introduced into China. Ming Te, a successor of Guang Wu, had a dream, which occasioned him to search for the Holy One in the West, as pointed out by Confucius. He sent an embassy to Hindustan, and some priests of Buddha returned with it and spread their idolatry through the land. This was in the dynasty of Han, which the Chinese consider to have been the most glorious period of their history. The principal part of the 8 emperors who reigned in the dynasty of Sung were selfish and cruel monsters, unworthy to sit upon a throne. Most of them were murdered by their subjects. China was divided into 2 principal kingdoms during this government, the Wei princes, who were Tatars, having the north with Honan for their capital, while the Sung princes held the south, the capital of which was Nanking. It was hardly likely that the 2 kingdoms would regard each other with much affection. 2 mastiff dogs, who have torn without conquering each other, will snarl as long as they have any teeth. There was the same struggling for power among the rulers of China in the dynasties of Tse, Liang, Qin, and Sui, as we see among crowded heads in modern times. Yang Qin subjected both the northern and southern dominions to his command, and again the empire became one. The Tatars, however, still kept advancing on the frontiers. Yang Te was celebrated as a scholar, and he wrote not only of his own times but also of former dynasties. He was assassinated by Lei Yuan, a famous general who raised Kung Te Tung to the throne. Let me here give you a word of advice. If people will insist on your being Lord Mayor of London, submit with a good grace, but on no account whatever allow them to make you Emperor of China. After the Sui dynasty came that of Tang, in which Christianity was made known to some of the people. The Hao Liang, Hao Tang, Hao Xin, and Hao Han dynasties followed. During a part of the Tang dynasty, the western provinces were much exposed to the ravages of the Turks. But Tang Kao Su, by his policy, saved the state which was in danger. He persecuted the priests of Tao and Budu. Te Sung, his son, extended his empire to the borders of Persia. Literature and poetry flourished under the successors of Te Sung. Chu Wan was the captain of a band of robbers. He deposed Chao Sung and set Chao Xuan Te on the throne. Whether he thought that because he raised him, he had a right to pull him down, I cannot say, but pull him down he did and founded the Hao Liang dynasty AD 907 by seating himself on the throne, taking the name of Lien Te Su. He was murdered by his son. His son was slain by his brother, Liang Chu Tin, and Liang Chu Tin, in his turn, was deposed by Chuang Tu. See what it is to be an emperor. Give me my bits and my drops with quietude and peace, and the Changs and the Wangs, the Qings and the Kings may keep up, as long as they like, their scramble for the imperial throne. Chuang Tu was a cruel and avaricious libertine. He was followed by Ming Tsung, a Tatar who ruled wisely, humbled the Tatars, his countrymen, and curbed the haughtiness of the insolent mandarins. Where you find one emperor in his conduct white as snow, you will find two as black as ink. The dynasty of Hao Chao had one virtuous emperor. His name was Shi Sung, the father of his people. He established schools, consulted wise counselors, and overturned the idols of the land. Chao Kuang Yin began the Sung dynasty, a man of energy and talents, but ambitious and cruel. He shed the blood, it is said, of millions of Tatars in his determination to reduce them to obedience. In the reign of King Tsung, the Tatars plundered Pekin and established a dynasty in the north under the name of Qin. In AD 1225, Lei Sung, by calling in the aid of Genghis, the leader of the Mongols, overcame the dynasty and again united it to the ruling power of the south. The Mongols then attempted to conquer China, and at last Kublai, the leader of the Mongols, in AD 1279 occupied the throne. Thus began the Yuan dynasty. Kublai was one of China's most powerful rulers. It fitted out a fleet of 4,000 vessels in order to subject Japan, but death ended his prospects. He who mounts a throne is only raised a few feet higher than other people for a few years, and then he comes down to the dust, the level of humanity. I wonder whether emperors ever think of these things. I think I should if I were an emperor. Chuan Yen Chang, a robber, established the Ming dynasty by chasing the last Mongol emperor from the throne and seating himself in his place. Thus once again was this mighty empire governed by native emperors. This brings down the history of China to the year AD 1368. Among the emperors of the Ming dynasty were Qinghua, Hongche, Qingti, Kye-Xing, in whose reigns the Portuguese found their way to China and introduced popery. Lung King, Wan Li, Tin Qi, and Sung Qing, and during their reigns, war poured out on the country. His stormy terrors, famine and rebellion stalked abroad, and Cochin China threw off its allegiance. At last, the Ming dynasty came to an end. If dynasties and emperors and kings, aye, and common people too, would look at their end more frequently than they do, it would be well for them. Lei was a desperate robber. He took possession of the capital of China and made himself emperor, commencing the Ta-Sing dynasty. But he was overthrown by Sung Ti, a leader of the Manchu Tatars. Sung Ti died, and his nephew, under the name of Shun Che, ascended the throne. He was followed by the renowned Kang He, whose mastermind won the hearts of the Chinese, defeated the Mongols and Kalmucks, reformed the government, and established firmly that dynasty which still exists. Kang He died in 1723, after reigning 60 years. None of these great emperors found out the secret of living forever. He died and he was buried, is the end both of the poor and of the proud. Yung Ching reigned after Kang He. He banished the Jesuit missionaries to Canton on account of their influence and intrigues. Next came Kien Lung or Keen Lung, in whose reign the Dutch, the English, and the Portuguese endeavored to obtain a footing in China by sending embassies. Kien Lung was a much better emperor than most of those who preceded him. He undertook an expedition against the Miao Se, a race of mountaineers, and boasted of having completely subdued them. But do you think if he had done so, he would have allowed them to wear their hair as usual? Not he! He would have made their heads as sleek as his own. Kien Lung, like Kang He, reigned 60 years and resigned his throne to his son Kye King in the year AD 1795. Kye King, like too many of the emperors of China, was a profligate and selfish prince. I shall have something to say of him in a future chapter. He died in the year AD 1820, and the present emperor, Tao Quang, or Reason's Glory, succeeded him. The most important circumstance by far, which has hitherto occurred in his reign, is the success of the British in their attack on a part of the Celestial Empire. The dragon of the Son of Heaven must in future hide his claws.